My first memory formed when Hurricane Katrina had happened. I was 4 years old, and my family was urgently packing their things as needed to flee our home in New Orleans. We ended up driving off to my grandparents' house in a more rural part of the state. I recall looking at the TV a couple of days later and seeing live footage of the Six Flags amusement park being absolutely flooded with water, to such a severe degree that only its tallest points stuck out from the blue void that encapsulated it. I thought that instance in my life was where my fear of natural bodies of water developed. I was fine with swimming pools. In fact, I have many fond memories of going to pool parties and water parks as a kid, but that was because the water was chlorinated and clear. In most natural bodies of water, you can't see anything below a few feet at best, and even then, it was much murkier than man-made pools. You could have offered me $1 million, and I would still refuse to go further than knee-deep in a lake or ocean. To say it made my family vacations a bit difficult would be an understatement. Anyway, my grandpa passed away some years ago, and a few months back, my grandma did as well, leaving their house vacant with a whole bunch of stuff to sort through. Both of my parents were working, and because it was June at the time, I was freshly out of school. This left me as the only person in my family who had the time to drive up to my grandparents' house and determine what to keep, what to sell, what to throw away, and so forth. It would be my first time visiting the house since Katrina, so a solid 15 years. My family simply never made the time to go back after we'd found a new place to live in. We didn't even reside in Louisiana anymore. I pulled up to the house at around noon and got around to sorting as assigned. There really wasn't anything special. It was mostly just junk. As night fell, I decided to take a break, watch some YouTube, and eat some snacks. After I started a video, I heard a bizarre gargling come from outside. I don't know why at the moment, but my heart began to race. I paused the video, and a few moments later, it happened again. I was in full-on fight or flight mode now, but also incredibly confused. I looked out the sliding glass door that led to the back balcony to see what it was. I didn't find anything, but my eyes laying upon the swamp before me triggered a series of memories I had completely blocked out of my brain before then. After child me watched the Hurricane Katrina footage that night, I was about to sleep in the bedroom with the balcony when I heard that same gargling coming from the swamp. I went to look at it, and there, standing waist-high in the water, was a creature I could best describe as skeleton-shaped, covered in moss, lily pads, and twigs. It was lanky, and it appeared to have no eyes. I suppose the strangest part is that I don't remember feeling scared upon seeing it. I was more intrigued than anything else. However, before I could do anything, my grandpa caught me standing there and told me to go back to sleep. But the same thing happened the next night, except this time, I spotted with the water up to its shoulders. I was intensely curious, so I went onto the balcony and down the stairs that led to the backyard. Even though this thing lacked eyes, only sockets where they would have sat, it still seemed to stare at me, and its gargling ceased. I said hello to it, and in response, it slowly submerged itself back in the water. Then, some seconds later, reappeared and slowly stood up, to the point where the water was only up to its knees. It began gargling again as water dripped off its body, and it slowly extended its bony hand to me, tilting its head. I figured it was friendly, and stepped forward while reaching my hand out, touching one of its hard, slimy fingers. For a moment, it didn't do anything. then wrapped its hand around my wrist, gently tugging at it, encouraging me to come into the water. I told it no and pulled back. It didn't like this. Its grip grew stronger, and it snapped its head back into an upright position. Its gargling turned into hissing, and the shrubbery on its hands seemed to tie itself around my wrist as well. But at that point, who knew what was really happening? Before I knew it, I was being dragged into the murky depths. I screamed as loud as I could, but was silenced when I was forced face down into the water. I could not see anything, and my lungs quickly filled with distilled mud as I thrashed around to the best of my ability in hopes to escape. My father pulled me out, and I coughed up the water and began crying. He tried to calm me down, but there was no point. I remember screaming to him about this skeleton creature, but he just seemed confused. If I were in his shoes, I would have just assumed I had a nightmare and sleepwalked into the swamp. Once I finally began to relax, I was brought inside, given a bath and a change of clothes, and something to eat. I ended up spending the rest of the night in a sleeping bag on the floor of my parents' room. I have some flimsy memories here and there of being put on a child's leash for a couple of years, but I never considered that this event was probably what made my parents decide to do such a thing. No doubt in my mind that the event is what truly triggered my fear of natural bodies of water as well. I was pulled out of my recollection of thoughts to the sound of gargling again. I knew there wasn't much I could do. I refused to sleep outside, and I didn't even want to look out the window. I didn't want it to catch a glimpse of me. I had brought my AirPods, so I continued to watch YouTube and Netflix until I fell asleep. I'm surprised I achieved such a feat. My nightmares that night were awful. I dreamed that this skeleton stood outside my window, watching me sleep, and that my bedroom began filling with swamp water until there was only a few inches between me and the ceiling. And when I woke up to the sun coming in through the curtains, I had never been more grateful. I knew I didn't want to stick around this place much longer, but at the same time, there was a lot of work to be done. I wasn't a foolish child anymore. I just needed to stay in the house. Even then, if it did come into contact with the thing, chances were I would be able to fight back by now. It probably only seemed ridiculously strong as a child because I was only 4 years old. The dumb part of me wanted to go out of my way to antagonize this thing, to seek my revenge, but I ultimately knew better than to do that. It would be best if I kept my distance. I continued sorting through my grandparents' junk, the daytime being slow-paced and uneventful, which I was grateful for. However, soon enough, I had stumbled upon something peculiar, and that was my grandmother's paintings. They were normal at first. During her lifetime, she depicted a lot of natural, realistic scenes of forestry and mountains. But then, I found the paintings of the swamp. As I just mentioned, they were completely ordinary when I began to sort through them. But then there were more. As I went through the paintings, I began to spot the creature in them. With every painting, its body ascended further up from the water, and it only got closer to the foreground. A shiver went up my spine. It felt like I shouldn't be seeing this stuff, and I didn't want to touch it anymore. I shoved the paintings back into a corner and knew I had had enough. It was sunset by now, and I wanted to be out before dark so I wouldn't hear the awful gurgling of the thing. As soon as I made my way to my car, the familiar noise made its way into my ears. I could not help but look back. There, in the distance, I could make out the creature in the water, with nothing but its neck and head above the murk. Upon me spotting it, it slowly descended back down until it was no longer visible. I wasn't going to mess around anymore. I got in my car and I drove the hell out of there, not daring to look back. On my way home, I called up my parents and told them about what had happened and the memory I had resurfaced. My parents were surprised to learn that I had no memory of nearly drowning, as apparently it impacted me for a long time, that I was constantly anxious and wandering around, anticipating the skeleton to return. They claimed that my behavior persisted until a little after I started first grade, and once it subsided, they took that as a cue to let me off the leash. There haven't been any problems since then. I mean, until now, I suppose. My parents, while not super religious or spiritual, let me know that they thought it was best that nothing from the house was brought back into ours. So, I ended up pulling over on the side of a country road, littering my grandparents' belongings into a field. I hoped that nothing would happen to anybody who decided to pick them up, and even though it had been a couple of months, I still worry about it. I returned home, and nothing happened. My family and I don't really talk about it. I hear now that Hurricane Laura is going to hit the entire state of Louisiana, and although it is a horrific disaster, I unapologetically hope that it decimates my grandparents' house and the land along with it. I do not know whether or not that thing is living, or a ghost, paranormal, or whatever. It doesn't matter. It didn't even matter that I was hours away from it at this point. I wanted it gone, as any sane person would. You know, it still perplexes me how my grandparents appear to live peacefully for years with that thing, whatever it was. Maybe they had no clue it was real, and my grandmother saw it in her dreams like I did, and inserted it into her paintings because of that. Regardless, speculating on it is useless, because they're dead now, and it is impossible to ask. In case you're wondering, I still do have my strict standards when it comes to navigating natural bodies of water. If anything, this entire event has reinforced my fear. Take my advice if you will. Don't go treading in murky water. You never know what can be waiting for you in there.